Morning, everybody, and welcome to today's panel. We're going to be discussing trade. The exact title of the session is Taming Trade. Big question is whether trade can actually be tamed at this point. But I will tell you, so I'm an anchor for Bloomberg Television, and if you've watched my show in the past year and did one of those word cloud things, I would say probably about 30% of the show I've been talking about either trade or tariffs. The other 30% is obviously artificial intelligence. You can guess the rest. But it is a huge topic, and I think it is just so timely to be having the discussion here, especially now, heading to the final months of the year. You know, when you look back at the course of 2025, at the beginning of the year, I think there was a lot of optimism. And then we had a series of shocks come through. You know, all of a sudden, the world was thrust into this much higher tariff regime, and it became a lot more common to talk about trade barriers, be they tariffs, be they non-tariff trade barriers, quotas, export restrictions. So we've all had to brush up our knowledge on the basic trading system. So we're going to be talking about how today's environment is impacting how companies, governments, multinational corporations are thinking about trade, supply chains, and also things like cybersecurity risks in this environment that we live in. I will say it's always nice to take a look at statistics as well, because we did get some statistics from the World Trade Organization last week. And I was a bit surprised to see, actually, that the WTO upgraded their forecast for growth this year to 2.4%. That is faster than the 0.9% that they predicted in August. So actually, trade has surprised to the upside. So this is the starting point. But they predict that next year is going to be worse. So they're only predicting a 0.5% rise for next year versus the 1.8% advance that was seen 2 months ago, i.e. the full effect of the tariffs has yet to be felt by the global economy. And then the other thing that caught my attention is that the main drivers of the stronger first half activity globally were shipments of AI-related goods, and I don't think that would come as a surprise to anybody. Trade in that category, which includes semiconductors, processors, computers, cloud servers, all expanded by more than 20%. So if you think about where the drivers of trade have come from this year, I don't think it's a surprise that AI has been one of the drivers. Okay, you don't want to hear from me anymore. Let me introduce the panelists. If you want to post about this session, you can use hashtag AMGFCC25. All right, without further ado, His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Ahmed Al-Zayuri, Minister of Foreign Trade for the UAE and a young global leader. To his left, we have Sarah Thorne, Vice President of the Global Government Affairs and International Sourcing at Walmart. To her left, we have Simon Evanet, Professor of Geopolitics and Strategy at the International Institute of Management Development, IMD, in Switzerland. To his left, Lauren Chung, Chief Executive Officer at Strategy and Communications Asia Pacific at Teneo Holdings, based in Hong Kong. And then to her left, we have Josephine Wolf, Director of the Hitachi Center for Technology and International Affairs, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, USA. Okay, Simon, I'm going to start with you. I did a little browsing on your LinkedIn the other day, and you'd written this really extensive piece about the emergence of a new balance of terror. And that sounds very scary, but I think it basically is a reflection of the fact that we are beginning to see somewhat of a weaponization of trade. So just unpack that for us, please.
Sure. So once the World Trade Organization was formed, the governments were disciplined by threats of lawsuits. If they broke the rules, other countries would take them to Geneva and they'd have to rectify their policies. Well, now that that system of adjudication is over, unfortunately, instead the discipline that's in the system is when large players threaten to hold back supplies of goods or rare earths or other items from trading partners in order to get leverage. And so what I was writing about there was how in an era of geopolitical rivalry, distrust between governments explode, and they look for levers, and often those levers involve weaponizing exports, like in rare earths, or weaponizing market access, which is what you're seeing from time to time when tariffs are raised extensively.
Are we moving away from an era of enforceable binding rules in trade?
We have already moved away from that. Effectively, those rules are unfortunately in abeyance. Those rules have become norms. They still matter because the private sector cares about compliance with good practice, but we have moved to a system where essentially there is much less external discipline on governments. If they want to play by the rules, it's because they choose to play by the rules. Unfortunately, many governments still do.
I'm going to ask you somewhat of a newsy question,
Yes.
but how much of this, and since you brought up rare earths and what China has proposed in the last week, it's obviously set off a massive round of discussions, potential retaliation from the US as well. How much of this is actually, to your mind, political posturing versus actual intention to go down that path?
Well, the interesting thing about threats is always that you can make them, and then the question is whether people respond to them if they're credible. So we can't really answer that question. China has made it very clear that it is prepared to monitor and restrict exports. It hasn't said how it's going to do that yet. It's not clear that it will follow through, but Deng Xiaoping warned us in 1987 that the Middle East has oil and China has rare earths. And what I'm afraid our American friends have done is to provoke the Chinese so much that they've now put this weapon on the table.
Sarah, yesterday the U.S. Trade Representative Greer said, and this is a quote, China's rare earths move is a supply chain grab. You spend a lot of your time analyzing supply chains. How are you thinking about, this evolving landscape and the fact that certain sectors are being a lot more protected these days?
Yeah, so, we spent the better part of the 6 or 7 months before the election preparing for what-if scenarios, if we had tariffs, if we had supply chain disruptions. And in some ways, we have a lot of muscle memory. We saw the first Trump administration, we lived through COVID, and we knew basically what we needed was a more agile and resilient supply chain. And so through really understanding our supply chain, through looking at first, second, third tier suppliers, through building up other sources of supply, we really tried to be as responsive as we could to make sure, our mission is to save people money so they can live better. And that essentially means we want to find the best value product at the best price for our customers. And that's really what the whole organization is oriented around. So, I think what we didn't anticipate was we'd sort of see it everywhere all at once. We kind of thought it would be oriented towards specific sectors or particular governments or particular economies. I didn't think that we would have quite so much disruption all at once.
Yeah.
And I don't, for example, I'll give you a quick example. A month ago, we had a tariff that was announced on Friday, implemented on Monday, that required us to know what percentage of steel and aluminum we had in our products in order to put the tariff in place. Nobody moves that fast, not even the customs authorities. And so I think it's that level of disruption that has been a bit harder for us to adapt to. But I will say, I feel like Walmart, we're a multinational corporation. We have operations in 19 countries around the world. We source from, 70, 80 plus countries. We have that kind of agility and flexibility. I do worry about our smaller suppliers. I worry about SMEs. I worry about families because they don't have the same tools and they're taking quite a bit more cost.
What are the tools that enable a larger organization to, I guess, in this domain, have a competitive advantage?
So we have alternative sources of supply. We can flex. Most of our suppliers operate and have facilities in more than one country. We have a surety of supply strategy where we look at what are the products that our customers truly want and that we need to have on the shelves. And then we look at the risks associated with those products, whether it's over-reliance on one country, one supplier, and then all of the geopolitical risks we've been talking about, climate, et cetera. You run it through an algorithm and you try to figure out what are the alternatives. And then we have, just incredible teamwork within the business to say, if you have this disruption here, what are we going to do? How are we managing the supply chain? Are we speeding up the boats? Are we slowing down the boats? What are, these are the things that the business has had to really, and I'm serious, has had to look at to say, again, mission focused, how are we making sure that we're delivering what our customers want?
Have you actually shifted sourcing? Have you had to shift sourcing?
So I think that that's the wrong question.
Okay. No offense.
Because I think that implies that like we were sourcing from one place and now we're sourced from everywhere. And so I think what we've actually created is more opportunities for different suppliers to source in different ways. And so the fastest growing part of our business is marketplace. So that means sellers, that means small businesses. So incredible opportunities for them to get on, the marketplace in all of our markets around the world, but also opportunities for new economies that we might not have looked at before. Because you have a barrier here, well, it becomes much more attractive to look at different countries. And so, yes, and we have a broader, I would say we've been more intentional about looking at a broader diversity of suppliers and a diversity of countries, and then thinking about, how do we use some of these existing trade rules to our advantage, that FTAs still exist.
Okay, let's pick that up with Lauren, because you bring a wealth of experience from the Asia-Pacific region, which was bearing the brunt of a lot of these latest tariffs, the tariffs announced by the Trump administration. Some have successfully lowered the tariff rate, but they're still much higher than where they were before. How have your clients had to adapt, and have any of them sensed this to be an opportunity of some sort to actually gain market share with other trading partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll come at that question wearing sort of two hats. So one is Teneo, and we advise CEOs and leaders on navigating all of these dynamics, Asian companies in the global arena and global companies in the Asian arena. But then also with my hat for the Trade and Investment Council, and we've spent a couple of days together discussing this very topic. But what we've done is gone out in the field over the last few months and actually sat with CEOs, board directors, chief strategy officers to really understand how they have responded and adapted to all of the, the trade chaos, for lack of a better word, and the geopolitical uncertainty, and then how they're positioning their businesses really for the future. And across many dimensions, so your supply chain, your CapEx plans, M&A plans, how you structure risk and resilience and corporate governance, and all these themes. There's a couple of, I think, themes that have kind of bubbled to the top. So the first is the supply chain point, and that this is still evolving. So we've seen a move to local for local, which is very much the theme for Asian companies and the ones that we've spoken to. And then regional for regional is an evolution of that. But the theme that's really emerging is how do you have configurability in your supply chain? How can you quickly reconfigure where you source, where you manufacture your products? And so, one of the CEOs I spoke to, talked about the need for having an Uber-type model, where you're calling on sort of different manufacturing hubs around the world, depending on how things evolve. In terms of opportunities, I think there are many, right? And individual businesses are seeing this as opportunity to, to capture market share, to overhaul business models, all sorts of things, to buy, competitors or assets at cheaper valuations. But the other one, I think, is this emergence that we're seeing of kind of new economic geometries and new sort of clusters of cooperation. And throughout the conversations I had with CEOs around the region, this was an emerging theme, that collaboration is now the new currency, right? So we can't rely necessarily on multilateralism or the rules of the road anymore. So business to business, though, we can collaborate. And I think, again, I sit in Hong Kong, and I think China's a perfect example of that. If you look at, what China's faced over the last, few years, so many sort of walls have gone up around what Chinese companies can and can't do, where they can trade, where they can invest, and where they cannot. And so if you know anything about the Chinese, they're incredibly resilient, innovative, and they move fast. Yeah. So what they've done is they've innovated. They've gone around those barriers and looking for new opportunities for collaboration and new trade investment routes. And so, we sit here in the UAE, that's I think a microcosm of this very trend where, collaborations are forming, new R&D partnerships, innovation partnerships, and coalitions of the willing that they're coming together to innovate with purpose. So I think that's a really positive sort of trend that's emerging amongst corporates. Thanks.
Simon's itching to jump in. You wanted to say something.
I wanted to really confirm this. We're not, I mean, we are seeing some trade redirection
Yes.
from China down to ASEAN and over to Africa, maybe less to Western countries. So I think there has been this search for new customers. But in the other big area for innovation that comes up from the companies I talk to, it's linked to your geopolitics point originally, is that many companies are thinking about the next generation of products as having less sensitive parts and components in from geopolitical rivals, and that will lead to a change in manufacturing footprint
Yes.
around the world. And you know, countries which are well trusted by all, so this country would count,
Yes.
would be well placed. Where I'm based in Switzerland counts as well. So I think that's the future.
Yeah, excellent point.
That actually ties in nicely to a question that I wanted to put to Josephine. I mean, you are a cybersecurity expert, but you know, you look at all of these things, and I just wonder, you know, how feasible is it actually to limit access to certain technology to gain a strategic advantage? I mean, we saw it, you know, in the case of China this year. I guess the assumption was that if you would restrict China's access to certain high-end chips, that they wouldn't be able to build LLMs as powerful as the LLMs coming through from the US. And then we had the DeepSeek shock at the beginning of the year, which I guess countered that example. How do you see that dynamic playing out?
So I think it's hard because the technology is always evolving. And so if I say to you today, you need this kind of chip, you need this much computing power to do X, Y, or Z with a large language model or any kind of AI system, that might be true right now, but it might not be true in a month or in 6 months or in a year. And in the meantime, it's also just really, really hard logistically to actually keep chips out of certain countries, right? The more specific you are about this very, very particular class can't go here or there, perhaps the more effective you'll be able to be, but there are computer chips everywhere. And so trying to say, we're definitely gonna keep these out of China and they're definitely not gonna be able to do any of the things we're worried about, turns out to be really hard. Turns out that you can do a lot with the chips that we maybe a year or 2 years ago thought aren't powerful enough. There's not gonna be any very useful applications. And on top of that, I would say there's a whole range of technology that we almost can't control at all, right? Once we're talking about software, once we're talking about the things where you don't have a kind of physical export, then you're talking about something where there's a really difficult enforcement problem that I don't think anybody has solved yet. And it's why I would say you've seen such a focus on hardware, right? Whether that's in chips, whether that's in telecommunications equipment for 5G networks, that's really been where people have focused, which makes sense from a kind of practicality standpoint. But the hardware depends a lot on what kind of software you can write and what you can do with that hardware. And that is just not static, and it's not going to be static.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Thani, you and I spoke in Davos at the beginning of this year. And back then I asked you the question about tariffs, and you said you were optimistic about how trade was going to pan out this year. But then, of course, the tariff announcement in April was such a huge shock to the world. Nobody really had anticipated that high level of tariffs to be imposed by the US administration. How have you seen the evolution of trade this year from your perspective?
Thank you, Jumana. If you allow me, I want to go back a little bit, and I want to touch on a point which Simon started. If we look at the WTO and rule-based system that we're having, he's absolutely right that everyone is generally countries are walking away from it.
Yeah.
But if we dig deep into it, the reality that the big ones were going against that rules, but the mid and small economies are still sticking to that because it's the only system which brings everyone on board. And that is a very strong message in partnerships and supply chain and how countries are going to work with each other. And we're seeing that direction of the movements of the supply chain from the south-south, mid to small to mid, and even sometimes to big economies. So is the rule-based system is collapsing? It's not collapsing. It's reducing. It is the historical power, but still there because it brings the majority of countries. Now, looking at the tariff and looking at what we have discussed earlier, everyone was expecting that the tariff is going to be very limited to certain countries and certain sectors because the administration in the US wants to fulfill certain objectives by that. But the evolvements and the reactions of different countries is the one which escalated this. the reaction, the extreme reaction by the Chinese, the extreme reaction by other countries, escalated the discussion, escalated the reaction even from the Americans themselves, which was not expected as well by the administration itself. The second one, the extreme acceptance by some countries messed up the whole plan. And it opened up another opportunity for the administration to continue in their demanding, because the minute it happens with Vietnam's and then with some other Asian countries, encourage them to continue with that by saying that the countries are going now to accept our conditions on this. Now, is this going to be the new norm? Absolutely. The 10% will not go down. So we have to live with that.
You don't believe it's going to go down?
I don't think, and even with the discussion with the administration, at least for the upcoming 3 years, we will not see a reduction below the 10%. So that's the new reality, and we have to live with it, and we have to start planning ourselves to ensure that we're overcoming this challenges that's going to face the world. Now, the American businesses, the multinational companies, they have to work around it. The main issue for the businesses is the unpredictability, because this continuous changes that no one can stick to a business plan, no one can have a long-term plan, and they have to keep changing their tactics on almost a weekly or sometimes daily basis. Now, how we're seeing this forward? More partnerships is going to happen, more free trade agreements is going to happen, changes in the mindsets and attitude from countries which we were never thought that they're going to change their mindsets. And I'm going to give you some examples from our experience as a country. We've been reaching out to Mexico for quite some time. They were not reacting to our request to start having an FTA.
Yeah.
We were negotiating with the Canadian governments the protection for investments agreements for years. We just concluded in a month after we
So
opened
it's
the
sprung countries
communications.
into action.
Mercosur were very difficult in negotiation. They're moving much faster. EU now is negotiating with the UAE, and we're moving in very good pace. So it really forced countries and blocs to move the way that they've been historically moving forward. Are we going to have a solution with this partnership? For sure. At the end of the day, the trade is like water stream. You know for sure the water stream is going to find its way. But with this barrier that comes the way, it's going to maneuver around it. But are we going to close our traditional relations and engagements and supply chain? Absolutely no. You have to continue maintaining that, because the minute that you walk away, you're going to lose that supply chain or that market that you've been working with. And you have to ensure the diversity. And this is exactly what we've been doing in the country. Even before the COVID, we know that diversity is going to come. So we start diversifying our investments, we started diversifying our trade. That's why we concluded 32 agreements, CEPA agreements in less than 4 years. And this is the approach that we have to do. And then I'll come back to the technology later on.
Okay, I like the cliffhanger. I also like the water analogy too. Lauren, what are your clients telling you about the outlook for next year?
The outlook for next year, I think the operating assumption is that it's much more of the same, that the volatility or the changes that we've seen in trade or the geopolitical sort of frictions that we've experienced this year they're long term, that there's a permanence to it. So it's more about how they now sort of adapt their business models. I think the focus has been very much short term, though, up until this point. It's getting through the slew of tariffs that we've seen come from the Trump administration, and the initial reaction and response and adaptation to that. I think, but beyond 2026, I think what we still need to see and what we're not seeing enough of is that longer range, planning. The directional signals as to where the world is going, these structural shifts are obvious to us all. Yes, there's bumps in the road around geopolitics and the dialogue between nations, but the direction is clear, whether it's new sort of blocks forming, whether it's AI, whether it's the bifurcation of technology ecosystems, digital currencies. There are directional themes that are almost bankable realities that businesses can now plan around. So I think it's more that longer range planning that we still need to see, but the operating assumption for 2026 is definitely more of the same.
Simon, let me ask you, I don't know if you have anything on the outlook before I ask you my question.
So let me give you an example of an outlook perspective, which is I was dealing with a very successful Swiss local champion, couple of billion francs in revenues globally. The CEO has been associated with the company for over 40 years. The drama of the past 9 months, for him, that's 9 months in 40 years. So he indeed has been figuring out, okay, what do we do in the short term? And then when we get to the middle of next year, then they will start asking harder questions about footprint. Should they establish some production in the United States? Again, a big question that people will be looking for is how does the USMCA free trade agreement, the deal with Mexico, Canada, and the US, how does that get renegotiated? And that will help companies identify whether Mexico is still an option for supplying the US. So I think things will start firming up a bit more next year, and we'll start seeing companies thinking much more strategically about the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, all of this has been very US-centric, right?
Yep.
So you just brought up these examples of,
Yep.
Pharmaceuticals, whatever it is, looking to establish a presence in the US to mitigate the impact of tariffs. What if other countries around the world start following the same template? Do you see that happening?
So at the moment, we don't see many other countries raising barriers to the same degree. There is a fear that we could end up with a fortress North America if Canada and Mexico are pressed into moving in a similar direction. But generally, the countries have been pretty effective at holding the line on trade barriers in a way that the history of the 1930s would suggest would not be the case. So in that sense, many governments have shown serious restraint. And I think one of the things we'll be looking for is whether these dominoes fall. I have actually looked sector by sector where the dominoes are. They tend to be in the sectors you would expect. Steel, some semiconductor parts and things like this, electronics. So there are dynamics there, but I don't think we see a global retreat into protectionism yet, thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, can you still be, you wanted to jump
I
in.
agree with them. When it comes to certain commodities, not even sectorials, it's going to be being looked at by country.
Then I'll ask you the question I was going to ask Simon then. Can you still be an open economy
Absolutely.
with very protected sectors?
The
Certain sectors.
The whole world is going to go toward that. I mean, when it comes to mid and low economies, that is going to be the approach, and they're going to start looking at the impact and consequences of dumping the markets of those commodities which cannot go to the US or cannot go to the EU. And we have to ensure as well we're protecting our industries. Otherwise, we're going to compensate something against the other. For us, the UAE, we're going to continue being an open. But we started the measures on the steels in the last 1 week, especially that we're seeing a huge dumping coming from China to our local market.
Okay. Sarah, I looked, the average, so I got this number from the Yale Budget Lab. This is a week ago, I'm sure you know it, but the average effective tariff rate for US consumers right now is 17.9%. You mentioned obviously the highest since 1934. So obviously, as a company, you have to think about your trade-offs. Do you pass on those extra prices to your consumers? Do you take a margin hit? Some of those are very difficult decisions. And I just wonder how, as a big company, you have had to make these decisions, how you've had to weigh those trade-offs in terms of maximizing, obviously, your profits for your fiduciary responsibility, but at the same time, not losing too much market share.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't have to make those decisions. And our merchants and our teams do. Again, I just go back to the fact that, we're going to invest in price when we need to invest in price. We're going to try to make sure that families have the products they need. And then we're going to do everything we can to mitigate. And so I think you've seen across, in the last 6, 8 months, everybody takes a piece of it. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, a tariff is a tax. It's added a cost to the goods. And our business model is sort of like price margin equals price. And so we've got to find ways to try to mitigate. We work with suppliers, we look at new alternatives, we obviously invest in price where we can. Back to school, super important for families. We were really committed. We look at the basic basket. We look across categories, you know what I mean? So the merchants are really clever and are trying to make sure they're making really choiceful decisions about where price needs to go. And I think you saw our CEO yesterday was saying, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for customers to have the products they need. Obviously, prices have gone up in certain places. We told the administration, we're going to hold our prices for as low as we can for as long as we can, but there are going to be places where it's just not possible when you have tariffs in excess of 50% in certain countries and on certain categories above 50%. The one thing I will say that has been particularly frustrating is sort of the spillover effect of some of these tariffs, where you put tariffs on steel and aluminum, and then everybody else that uses steel and aluminum wants tariffs, and then more people that, so this inclusion process for steel and aluminum is now, the proposals are to affect products like tuna fish, which we don't actually make or process in the United States, fruits and vegetables in cans, bikes. These are all products that families rely on for nutrition, and low-income families rely on. And so there is an impact on people and on real people, because it's just really hard to stop once you start this escalation of tariffs.
Do you think that businesses actually do play a significant role, especially one like Walmart, in preserving the integrity of the trading system?
I do. We are strong supporters of the multilateral trading system, and picking up on a point that, where the administration is clearly in a tariff mode that was signaled throughout the administration, throughout the campaign. This is not a surprise and should not be a surprise. The president campaigned and won on tariffs is his favorite word. But what I do like seeing is other countries saying, actually, we don't think that's great policy, and we're going to actually find ways to create better rules-based trading system for us. And so seeing other economies around the world creating new partnerships, new opportunities, says to me, actually that system works pretty well. A rules-based system creates certainty for businesses, creates opportunity for small businesses, because that's what I worry about, is that if you have rules changing every day, your engine of growth, which is largely your small businesses, have a very hard time adjusting. And so seeing other economies say, you know what, we think certainty for business is a good thing. We think rule of law matters, and we're going to actually continue to pioneer here, and we're going to actually look at digital trade. That's the one place I will say where this administration is actually creating more forward-leaning policy, and I fully support it, and USTR has been great about saying, we do actually need rules for digital trade, thinking about where the economy is going as well.
I think the private sector is the main solution for this, because they have the tech, they can apply it quickly, and they can as well ensure that the revenue is maintained. And that's what exactly we saw over the last few months in the US, and how they manage to control the inflation that's going to be caused because of the tariff. Now, when it comes to technology, there are two parts. The governments, which has to use the technology, and the private sector, which we're seeing that they're leaving this in their sector. And that's why it's affected as well the importation of many of the tech equipments to the US, and the high rare earth and other inputs that goes to that sector. Governments, we're not seeing them that they're moving with the same speed. And that's why we have to, as a government, to ensure that we're applying AI and ensure the policies are analyzed, and at the same time, we're taking the right decisions moving forward. So the balance is critical, but the companies are going to be the one who's going to be taking the lead on applying the technology.
Lauren, and you speak to many of those companies. What are they saying?
No, I would absolutely agree with the Minister. I think that the private sector has a huge role to play here. I think gone is the time where policy is fed down from the government level and corporates just respond. I think that feedback loop is incredibly important. The real world implications of some of these policies, to Sarah's point, the impact on real families and affordability of products, and so we're on the front line of the implications of policy. So I think that feedback loop and companies coming together in coalitions as well, and having that dialogue with governments and co-creating policy, I think is a way forward. Again, that collaboration concept I think is critical.
Josephine, I want to bring it back to something that you and I were discussing before, and that is how some of these geopolitical concerns are affecting the public's trust in certain technologies. And when you think of the build-out of things like 5G, wireless, the infrastructure that goes along with that, there's a perception that some technologies or sourced from a certain country need to be avoided. Other countries are more open to it. Do you think that is going to create an unequal eventual outcome in terms of how far along various countries are in their digital infrastructure rollout?
It's an interesting question because I think a lot of the ways that we see cybersecurity conversations get involved in the trade dynamics have to do with government saying, we don't want these electronics made here, we don't trust this country, we don't think that this is safe. And I think often my sense has been, and I'm heartened to hear you say this is not coming top down from governments, because my perception has been that comes very much from governments. That everybody is happy to have their iPhone and not thinking about where it's manufactured, and then when they're told or when they read, this is dangerous, this comes from China, don't trust this, that can sometimes shift perceptions. But I think a lot of the ways in which sort of my world of cybersecurity gets brought into trade is with assertions from government saying, just trust us, we know things you don't, and these countries can't be trusted, or these manufacturing areas are dangerous. And that doesn't mean the governments are wrong, but I'm not sure the public perception is what's driving that, by and large. I think that a lot of that is sort of where you start to see the cybersecurity conversation get so entwined with trade, with ideas about protectionism, that can be really hard, especially with complicated technologies that most users don't understand deeply, to disentangle sort of how much safer is an iPhone manufactured in India from an iPhone manufactured in China. That's actually a really hard question to answer because it's a complicated piece of technology, and the question of sort of what different actors can do at different stages of the manufacturing process is not as straightforward as sort of this factory is in this country and therefore X, Y, or Z can happen there.
Dr. Then, I want to come back to your cliffhanger earlier. I'm going to ask you the AI question. How is AI shaping the global trading landscape?
Well, there are a few things. The first one, it's about data. And data. Supply chain, the cybersecurity is about the massive data that we'll have.
Yeah.
And it's already there. But how are we utilizing it the right way? Absolutely. At certain sectors, absolutely yes. But in many other sectors, no. Unfortunately, when it comes to supply chain and the whole steps or chain of logistics from the extraction until the consumer, no. And the processes, the documentations that goes through is unbelievable hassle to everyone. So AI is going to play a major role in reducing the timeline and ensuring the efficiencies of movements of commodities from A to Z. We're seeing many big logistical companies that are trying to catch up on this, and they've been forced during COVID to move quickly, and now with this disturbance, they're moving even much quicker. Now, going back to the bigger picture and the macro level, the world was not ready for such huge turbulence when it comes to trade, tariffs, etc. And that's why there's no alternate system which can be an alternate or a solution for many of the solutions, many of the issues that we're facing. Now, the only thing which everyone is capitalizing on is AI and the technology evolvements that they're trying to catch up so they can reduce the consequences of the tariffs and the policies. Now, the few things which we started with the World Economic Forum 3 years ago, with the trade tech, it shows that the technology is already there. The innovation is available. We just need to go and look for them that suits our own interest. So the ideas are there. We just need to go and combine them and work with those innovative, even including the SMEs ones. Second one, which I want as well to touch on, is the multinational companies. They're really smart, and I'm going to combine it with the technology. They're looking at which country that is going to are having the right tariffs, and let's go and have our presence there. There are two issues. One of them is the re-export, which we're trying our best not to be a gateway for re-export, so we don't harm our own traders and manufacturers. But the businesses, they're changing the brands, and they're coming up with new brands. Even if they have the large ones, they're building new brands so they can maneuver around the challenges. And how they're doing it? They're doing it by using the analytics of the different data that they have, and from there they're taking the right decisions.
Yeah. Sarah, does increased digitization of supply chains, the incorporation of artificial intelligence, does it make the system more robust, or does it make it more vulnerable?
Yes, and I think it depends what sort of governance we end up having over cybersecurity and AI. But AI, I mean, for us, it's incredible, and it's changing so fast. And I think companies are super excited about opportunities. You saw our announcement with OpenAI and shopping. It's just another extension of giving customers, they're all going to shop the way they want. A lot of people are on their phones, and if you cut out one more step and you can say, okay, where's the best and how do I get it, and we're there. If Walmart's the store of choice, I think it'll be really interesting. I will say, a lot of systems in trade are still super manual and not digitized. And so the one thing I worry about is if countries aren't digitizing customs, if we're not having automated commercial environments, you're going to have a two-tier world. Because with AI, we can classify product now. We can take out all of those steps that brokers and things like that. But if you haven't digitized your customs, you're going to be back, with pen and paper and an abacus. And so I think part of what we've been really focused on is trade facilitation. We're part of the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation. It's my favorite agreement in the WTO because it says to countries, we want you to meet these goals, but if you can't, here's how we're going to help you. And we're making good on it in the private sector and the public sector. So that's where I think in all the chaos and the noise, the best thing for countries to do is really focus on the building blocks of trade, which is good customs operation, digitization of permitting, really rule of law, get your house in order, and I think then you're going to have a much more ability to participate in the global system.
Simon, how do you see the outlook for digital trade? We obviously spend a lot of time talking about physical trade, but how do you see the outlook for that segment of the market?
Extremely positively, and it's exploding already. We are seeing some countries really steal the march in this. I was amazed to read in the UK's trade strategy that they claim 2.5 million people already partly support their livelihoods with digitally delivered services abroad. And that has come from nowhere in about 5 years. So I think the UK is just one of many countries which have realized that coming to some type of norms on how you regulate digital trade, how data gets treated, this is all an important area. And it speaks to the point made earlier that there will be new forms of trade rules and trade governance. Digital economy partnership agreements are going to be a critical part of that. And I think we will see some of the more advanced countries in the advance on this breaking new ground.
Josephine, on cybersecurity threats, I know this has been a big theme at the last couple of days over here, but what is best practice when thinking about building a robust trading system that is also resilient to cybersecurity threats as well?
So it's tricky because you have these sort of two competing priorities, or at least two competing priorities when you think about cybersecurity. And one is this resiliency, which is really important. And for resiliency, you generally want a lot of diversity, the things Sarah's talking about. You want to make sure that if one supplier is compromised or something like that, you have others you can shift to. And the other piece you worry about, coming back to the data point, is you worry about confidentiality. You worry about who's going to have access to the information, the communications going over these devices. And for that, you ideally don't want everybody to have an access point. And so those two things kind of push in different directions. How much diversity you want, how much sort of security and limited access you want. And the best practices depend on how you're going to prioritize those.
Yeah. Lauren, anything to say on just the digitization of trade and how some of the clients you were speaking to in the Asia-Pacific region are also potentially seeing an opportunity there?
Not as much my area of expertise, but I think one of the themes that we've been discussing on our Trade Council is actually the rise in services trade and actually how this has been booming over the last 12 months or so in spite of everything that's going on more broadly on trade. So I don't know, Simon, if you want to share a perspective on the services trade.
Well, just one fact. I was astonished to see that in the last 5 years, Britain's exports of services have gone up about £250 billion, and they now export more services than they export goods. And so I think this transformation is one that many other countries will see as well. And it is the future, I think.
All right. That's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you to the audience for hopefully sitting through the session and taking some major takeaways away from it that might benefit you in the coming months and years. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.